Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Founders Grid, sponsored by Gaper.io. Today, we have Justin Caldbeck. Justin is an American businessman, financial philanthropist, and a Silicon Valley venture capitalist. And he's also a former Duke University basketball player. Justin is the co-founder of Pinery Capital, a firm that raised $300 million and was a GP of Pinery Capital Fund 1 and Pinery Capital Fund 2. So he played a instrumental role in driving the early stage investments in Dia and Co, Skyplack, Bellhops, Heavenly, Launch Starter, Toss, and many other businesses. Justin, welcome to the show.
Mustafa, thanks. Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here. I will say these are some strange times, and want to at least, given it's, I don't know when this will air, but it's June 2nd today, and want to at least acknowledge what's going on right now. My heart is really aching right now for George Floyd's family and so many other people. I mean, I keep thinking about, my Black friends, former colleagues, entrepreneurs, and Black people everywhere. And I've just been thinking a lot about the issues that they face daily, right? Things I'll never be able to really comprehend. I can't imagine what it's like to have my children, worry, will they be safe when they get older going outside? Is it safe to put on a hoodie, or even just worry about kind of my day-to-day driving and walking around. And so it breaks my heart. And, in terms of the tech world, I've tried to do a lot around, giving to and working with charitable organizations around these kinds of issues, and funding Black and underrepresented founders. But there's a lot more to be done, and I hope a lot of us can do it. But just at least wanted to acknowledge that, given all that's going on right now.
Unfortunate times, and hopefully the world will be back to normal. Humanity will be back to normal, just as we observe. So thank you so much for taking the time out for the podcast. So,
Absolutely. Great to be here.
Our podcast is primarily focused towards, early stage founders, what they go through, the experiences and everything. So in your experience, the founder's DNA, entrepreneurial DNA, do you see it being different across different geographies, one coast doing better than the other, or one continent doing better than the other, or founders, they have a similar pattern of entrepreneurship?
It's funny. In the last few years, I've had the privilege to work with founders from really all over. So obviously the United States, England, France, Nigeria, Pakistan, other parts of Africa and Mexico. And, where I kind of come out is I really do believe in this notion of talent is everywhere. Talent is ubiquitous, but opportunity is not. And I have seen some of the best entrepreneurs I've ever worked with outside of the United States. And so, and I think that's happening more and more frequently, particularly in developing countries, for a few reasons. I think, first of all, you've got more access to technical talent than ever before, right? It is easier today to learn technical skills without ever stepping foot, in a college than ever before. You've got online schools like Lambda School. You've got more online resources than ever before. And you've got, I think an ability to control their own destiny, right? So like I can learn how to code and I can just build what I want. I don't need to go hire folks. But on top of that, you also have these platforms like Andala that allow you to hire and build teams from anywhere. I think you've also got kind of funding, I think, is more ubiquitous than ever, right? Like if I look at Africa, for example, there was more than a 4x increase between 2017 and 2018 in funding in startups in Africa, and then another 75% jump last year to more than $2 billion. And so you now have more funding resources for these great entrepreneurs to be able to build these companies. And so, I think there was for a long time this belief that Silicon Valley entrepreneurs were superior, right, to others, and that this is where, especially in the US, people needed to be. And I think that's been changing for a while, but that is accelerating with COVID more than any others, more than ever before, I would say. It is funny. Earlier in my career, when I was at Bain Capital Ventures, I was in Boston, and then I moved out west to launch their West Coast office for them in 2008. And one of the things that did really hit me as being very different was the DNA of West Coast versus East Coast investors. I actually found that to be very, very different. So I'll give you an example, and it's a bit of a generality, but I do think it largely holds true. What I've seen on the West Coast, particularly from the best firms, is there's a real bias towards product-oriented leaders and technical-oriented leaders, right? And they're not typically scared of young founders, first-time founders, right? They often are okay with investing in products that can become ubiquitous before they ever figure out a revenue model, right? And I'd say when I worked in Boston, and again, there are great East Coast firms that aren't like this, but like, General Catalyst or Union Square. But I'd say when I worked in Boston, I saw much more of a focus around sales-oriented entrepreneurs, revenue-generating entrepreneurs early on. I know that sounds a bit silly, but there was just a much different kind of DNA in terms of what investors looked for, particularly in consumer tech.
Got it. Interesting. So, okay. So, from a perspective of someone who wants to be, you mentioned that the DNA was different when it came down to investors, right? So, in your experience, what advice would you give to early investors who are just starting out to be, early stage VCs or early stage investors? So, what advice would you give to them?
Like people trying to become investors?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, unfortunately, I'm actually quite jealous of the tools that people have today to be discovered by investors. When I look back, when I was fortunate to get in the industry in 2005, there weren't social platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and others to be discovered, right? Facebook. There just weren't those kinds of platforms that were ubiquitous, that particularly Twitter, I'd say, where if you had thought leadership, you could be discovered, right? And so I'm very much jealous of that. I think the way I would tactically approach it, if I was someone interested in getting into venture, is I would think about, okay, what are investors trying to assess from me, right? Well, the first and most important thing I think that investors want to see is, candidly, like, what's your ability to uncover new deals? What's your ability to source new companies, right? Yeah. And today, I think the best way to do that is to build a fantasy portfolio, right? So it literally, the way I would think about it is, I would say, okay, what are the 8 to 10 companies that if I had a fund, I would be pursuing an investment in, or at least learning more about. And then I would write out an investment thesis for each one of those. And I would post those publicly, right? And I'll tell you, someone who did this very effectively is a young VC by the name of Turner Novak. He lives in Michigan, was completely outside of the circles of most VCs. And he went and did this. He built a fantasy portfolio and started to share it on Twitter and engage in conversations around similar companies. And ultimately, he landed an internship at a 4 Capital, and now he's a managing partner at Gelt VC. And I think that as long as you're not picking obvious companies, right? So I think you've got to be a little contrarian, right? You can't be picking things that Sequoia and Benchmark are already invested in, and great firms are all over, and you've got to find some kind of hidden gems. But I think that's a great way today. If you can do that and get that message out there, and people and VCs see how you think about the world, how you think about companies, there's going to be a set of VCs that are going to reach out to you, want to engage with you, and it'll give you a door to start those conversations.
So any misses, any mistakes, any deals that you missed out?
You mean companies that I wish I had invested in and I didn't?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'm proud that I don't have a ton.
Okay.
There are certainly a number that I look back on and wish I had been kind of more effective getting consensus on in various partnerships. But I think the ones that I look back on for me and think that I missed, in terms of mispursuing, right? You never know if you would have won the deal or been able to get access and all those kind of things. But a couple jump out to me. Uber really early on. Right?
Okay.
Uber when it was black cars only. And I ended up investing down the road, but I look back and say, gosh, I wish I had pursued spending time with the founders more. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I missed early on is the product was compelling, right? I could hail a black car from my phone at a time when the alternative was calling up a taxi, waiting on hold, not knowing if it was coming, et cetera, et cetera. The challenge for me was that it was, the price point. It was $40 to go, 10 blocks. Okay. And so I looked at it and said, gosh, can this ever be mainstream, right? I've got hedge fund managers that are scoffing at the price point. Will this ever be mainstream? And at that point, there was no notion of what ultimately became UberX, right? Which is, now a cheaper, better, faster version. I invested in a company called Sidecar, which was the first one to do taxi replacement, but they ultimately were out executed by Lyft and Uber. And then I think another one that I passed on for similar reasons was Instacart, and again, I looked at it and said, gosh, does the average family, are they willing to pay delivery fees, markups on items? Are they willing to pay an exorbitant price for convenience? And, it's been a theme of two of those misses is people are willing to pay for great products. And those are ones that I look back and wish I'd spent more time around.
Post-COVID world, post-corona, post-COVID world, what industries do you think will pick up? Which won't?
Post-COVID world. When you say industries or specific companies, or what do you?
You can pick either way, industries or companies.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's, so I live and breathe consumer tech, right? And I'm fascinated by the behavior changes that COVID has driven, but even more than that, kind of just the acceleration of technology in so many ways, right? And I think the platforms I'm most excited about right now are the ones that are allowing creators or service providers to work on what they love to work on from anywhere and earn income, right? And you're seeing this in a bunch of different platforms, right? You're seeing things like Substack for people to be able to create email newsletters, which I think is going to be a very large company. Things like OutSchool, a platform for live video classes. You've got things like, Cameo, even kind of that allow, B, C, D-list celebrities or some A-list celebrities, but to kind of earn income from video shout outs, right? And I think these platforms are going to continue to grow with individual influencers seeking to gain audiences and ultimately a marketplace model that will allow consumers to really discover kind of those individual providers whose individuality is highlighted. I think there's obvious categories like fitness instructors and education, right? That I think everyone is seeing. I think there's, to me, what's exciting though is some of the other use cases that are still relatively nascent, right? Everything from home chefs, right? So, the ability to be able to access a marketplace of home chefs near me, right? And that could be a professional chef. That could be my grandmother cooking, spaghetti and meatballs. I just think there's so much opportunity, so many people for whom food is really important in their culture,
Yeah.
to be able to build businesses from their home, right? Everything from that to, candidly, I look at religion, and I look at, over time, the ability to discover, follow religious leaders in my faith wherever they are and be a part of their particular worship group, right? No longer should I be restricted to the place of worship that happens to be within 15 or 20 minutes of me, right? I want to be able to be a part of those communities wherever that leader that I best identify is with. And I think there's just a host of opportunities there that COVID has accelerated the adoption of, and gotten people more comfortable engaging in video chats like this, right? We all know, right? The number of Zoom calls we're doing today is orders of magnitude more than we were doing 4 months ago.
Exactly.
And I think that some of those opportunities are really exciting to me.
So last question, Justin, in regards to remote employment, how do you see that evolving? And just adding on top of it, this co-working spaces. We've been hearing the WeWork debacle and everything since last year. So, and now in the COVID, we're seeing a lot of remote work being increasing up. So your thoughts on those two?
Yeah, I think it's, look, this is something, remote work is not a new thing, right? It was, it used to be called kind of telecommuting. And it's something that has been steadily growing, right? I think the last stat I saw was it had grown 150% from 2005 to 2017. So it was growing. But, and the tools in the last few years have been built, like things like Slack, right, have been built to enable more remote work. I think unquestionably, though, COVID is, has changed this for good, right? There have been recent studies, Glassdoor did one, right, that I think 2/3 of employees would support if their employers mandated employees to work from home indefinitely, right? So people are finding themselves productive. People are finding themselves having much more time in the day. Now, there are still things to work out, right? What do people do around childcare and those kind of things? But for the most part, I think that companies are seeing all of this fiction around people not being able to be productive from home has not really turned out, right? And so you've already got companies, Facebook, Shopify, Coinbase, Twitter, and others that have said, we're going to be working from home indefinitely after the pandemic. And I think that, I certainly continue to look for and invest in companies serving those needs, because I think it's, it's unquestionably here to stay. And, I think it's going to be not rare, but far less common for mandated, centrally located in big urban environment workspaces in the same way it was before. Companies are going to find it's just as effective. It's a lot cheaper. And then you've still got to, like, this is actually an area I'm actually really excited about, is who is building the team bonding tools, right, for remote employees, right? I think that's one of the things you lose when you're not by the water cooler every day, is joking around with your friends and maybe going out to lunch or going out to happy hour. Who is building the tools that feel more fun, feel more bonding for work environments that that ultimately are mostly or all remote going forward. And I'm excited to see kind of what's built there over time.
Justin, Last, any three pieces of advice that you would give to young founders, entrepreneurs out there? It can be anything regarding work or mental health, anything, startup founders primarily. Any piece of advice, three pieces of advice you would want
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one is, I think the first one I would say is around mental health is, being a founder is an incredibly difficult journey, right? Like highs and lows, and you often feel, on an island. And so, find that support system, find, a therapist, right? And someone who you can talk to about those highs and lows. Because I think that journey is for all the bravado and all the sharing on Twitter about the highs, there's many, many lows as a founder as well. And so I would encourage that. I think two, think about diversity and culture day
to.
one. Don't hire people that look like you, right?
Right.
Like happen to be from the same backgrounds and the same social circles. Like really try to day one diversify your founding team, right? I think you're going to get better perspectives. You're going to get, I think more diverse thinking, and it's going to push the company in lots of ways. And then as I would say the third, I'm a huge believer in verticalized venture capital. Like I think firms like Emergence Capital and SaaS and Mickey Malka and FinTech, I loved what we were building at Binary in consumer tech. I believe that is the future of VC. And so what I would say to a founder is, particularly early on when you're choosing partners, don't be, pick the best partners. Now that could be great brands, but really look hard at the experience of that partner in the area of where you're trying to build something, right? And I think a lot of times founders optimize around valuation early on. I think there's a place for that. Optimize for valuation at the growth stage. You've built a business, you're scaling, take the cheapest money at that point, right? But early on, find partners that can help you scale, that have seen the movie before, and who you trust. And I think those would be the three pieces of advice I give.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you so much for being on the show. Take care of yourself and stay safe.
Same to you, Mustafa. Talk soon. Thanks for having me.